pain was particularly bad today. Margaret hadn't felt this terrible before, and she'd had some doozies. She knew her symptoms could and would likely worsen over time, but she hadn't anticipated this. It took every ounce of energy she had just to roll onto her side and reach for the PCA button. She knew it was just within reach. She had likely let go of it after she trailed off to sleep earlier in the day. She felt around on the bed sheets, each movement of her hand requiring an effort of Herculean proportions. God, she was so depleted. Then, eureka. Her fingers nudged the button. She walked them forward to wrap around it, then pushed. From her peripheral vision, she saw the PCA pump activate as it delivered medication to her IV tube. Now it was a waiting game. The morphine was fairly effective, but even if it were only able to dull the pain 50%, Margaret would still consider it a win. Anything was better. She lay there and let the painkiller do its thing. She could feel her body becoming infused with a numbing warmth. Her eyelids started to droop, and she had nearly fallen off to sleep again when something beeped. She forced her eyes open at the sound. At first she thought the chime was coming from the PCA pump, but even in her hazy state she recognized the beep was coming from across the room and not anywhere near the pump. She forced her eyes open and lethargically panned them around the room. What was that? To her ears, which were beginning to swim in euphoria, it sounded like it was coming from the top of the dresser. Margaret narrowed her eyes. She passed them over the miscellany on the dresser's surface. Multiple photographs, a jewelry box, a brush, and something else she couldn't quite make out. She focused on the item with its splashes of pink when it hit her. It was Sasha's Apple Watch, which she hardly ever took off. She only ever removed it when she bathed Margaret. She must have forgotten to put it back on after she finished sponge bathing her this morning. The beeping was likely an alarm she had set for herself, probably a reminder to administer Margaret's regular medication, she thought. It was wonderful to have such an attentive caregiver. But now the alarm pierced her skull like so many nails. Every shrill pulse drove her one step closer to madness. She mentally willed Sasha to charge into her room and shut it off, but her muddled memory recalled that Sasha had left for the afternoon and wouldn't be back for hours. Margaret couldn't wait that long. With diminished strength, she pulled a pillow over her head, but the sound penetrated through the IKEA brand effortlessly. This was agony. Margaret clamped her eyes shut and tried to drown out the sound by listlessly humming, but it didn't work. She only ended up merging her atonal melody with the alarm's tempo. It became a matter of will, of focus and intent. Margaret directed her ailing mind to push the sound from it, to replace the noise with silence. She immersed herself in that place, embracing an oral space where the alarm no longer existed, its intrusive bleating fading into the background until it was gone. Margaret smiled at the imagined peace. Then she opened her weary eyes. There was no more alarm, and just before sleep claimed her, she glimpsed the place where the watch had been but now was no longer there. Margaret awoke sometime later to Sasha scurrying around the room. She felt only slightly better, but she knew it was only temporary. The morphine could only do so much, but at least the pain had retreated to a dark corner for the time being. Her life was now measured in simple, albeit tiny victories. She would take her current state of being as a notch in the win column. Sasha asked if Margaret had seen her watch. Margaret said she thought she saw it on the dresser, but Sasha only shook her head, claiming that she had checked and it wasn't there. Margaret frowned. Had she imagined it? Had she dreamed she saw the watch and heard the alarm? Even though she had been under the influence of potent opioids at the time, she didn't think so. So where did the watch go? Sasha excused herself to search the rest of the house, convinced she had set it down somewhere else. Margaret pushed herself up and looked at the dresser. What was going on? She was done second-guessing herself. She knows she saw the watch and that Sasha didn't have it. Otherwise, why would she be looking for it? Margaret dug into her short-term memory to replay the events from earlier in the day. The alarm had gone off and been grating. She had concentrated on its silence, and when she looked up, both the sound and the watch were gone. Margaret thought long and hard about how that could be, but the only explanation she could come up with was far from a rational one. To her, only one thing made sense to do: attempt to replicate the action, if for no other reason than to rule out the unbelievable theory as being absurd. Margaret looked around the room and settled on a small flower vase on a corner table. She could clearly see it, so there should be no doubt about its existence if her hunch proved to be correct. She focused on the vase, then closed her eyes. She sank back into the pillows on her bed and let the world fall away. Her mind was solely fixated on the vase, its shape, its color, its location. She imagined it on the table. Then she imagined that it wasn't. She started to feel ridiculous for thinking such a crazy thought. What she supposed couldn't really be true, could it? But when she opened her eyes, she let out a gasp so potent that Sasha came running back into the room. The vase was gone. Margaret spent the better part of 10 minutes trying to reassure Sasha that she was okay, that she had fallen victim to that peculiar space between a hiccup and a sneeze. Sasha was reluctant to believe her at first, but eventually did, even though she resorted to a second round of questioning before she left for the night. Margaret assured her she was all right, but that was a lie. She felt horrible, worse than she ever had, but she didn't want to let Sasha know. Not only could she do nothing to help, but Margaret desperately wanted her to leave so she could further explore what happened with the watch, and now it seemed, the vase. Margaret had already used her allotted medication, but her pain was starting to ramp up. Even if she clicked on the PCA button like a faulty computer mouse, the pump wouldn't deliver anything until the next designated window. Margaret didn't know how she would make it that long. Instead, she turned her waning energy to the miraculous events that had played out in her room. Where had those items gone? And could she do it again? She zeroed in on a hair tie on the floor and concentrated. When she looked over, it was gone. She locked on a magazine on a chair and wished for it not to exist. When she opened her eyes, it was no longer there. Her heart raced. How big could she go? She looked over at the mirror dresser along the far wall and the water bottle that sat on top of it. She closed her eyes and focused. When she opened them, the bottle was missing. Margaret's pain was starting to increase at an exponential rate, and her usual level of nausea was amplified and growing. But she didn't want to stop. Not yet. She wanted to try something even larger. She trained her weary eyes on the ottoman to a rocking chair across the room. She let her eyes slide shut, her thoughts centered on the ottoman and imagining it fading from the world. She forced her eyes open and discovered only an empty space where the ottoman had been. Despite all her misery, Margaret still found the energy to smile. Then she passed out. She awoke in the night to searing pain and crippling sickness. It couldn't be much longer now, she thought to herself. But just how much longer would she have to endure this? She had pressed the PCA button 20 minutes ago, but the medication had barely made a dent in her symptoms. She knew she could call Sasha, but really, what would that achieve? She couldn't do anything, and whatever she tried to do to help would only prolong the inevitable. But Margaret couldn't go on like this. Then a thought occurred to her. It was crazy what she was thinking, but desperate people often resorted to desperate measures. This was no way to live, so Margaret made a decision. And then she closed her eyes and used what remained of her cancer-riddled brain to focus on the next object she wanted to make disappear. It would be the biggest one yet. When Sasha arrived the next morning, she walked into Margaret's room and immediately began relaying the details of a dream she'd had the night before. She set down her bag and started tidying as she spoke, and it wasn't until she glanced over to gauge Margaret's reaction that she realized she hadn't been speaking to anyone. Margaret's bed was empty.